Good.
I guess we're live.
Are we live?
Yeah.
We are
That's
indeed.
cool.
Hi, everyone.
What's good, Big Bad Con? Welcome to The Art of Violence, martial arts as a narrative device. I am going to sometimes be your moderator because there's only three of us. It feels awkward to have a dedicated moderator with only three people, but I guess
Someone's got
train
to
off.
ask the questions and keep us on track.
Yeah. Mendes is just gonna keep us all organized. That's what's gonna happen.
There we go. Yeah.
That's why you're on the bottom.
Yeah. At least on our screen,
right?
Presumably on everyone else's.
No idea where everybody is on the real streets.
Yeah. I guess we should introduce ourselves. What's good? I'm James Mendez Hodes. I use he, him pronouns. Mostly people call me Mendez because usually there's someone else named James on the call or in the meeting or something like that, or at the con. I go to Big Bad Con a lot, like in person. It's gotta be one of my favorite conventions. And I'm a game designer sometimes, a game writer sometimes, and a cultural consultant a lot of the time, which is a fancy way of saying that people hire me to tell them that they're racist. But I also consult on a bunch of other topics like martial arts. I end up doing a lot of consulting for games and fiction and lots of other media about how to integrate martial arts and martial culture into the thing that you are making, as part of the cultural consulting or part of the game design. And I have a background doing a number of different martial arts from the United States and Brazil and Japan mostly, and China a little bit. So I'm really excited to talk about martial arts because people who do martial arts want to talk about it all the time, often to people who don't do martial arts. And this is our chance to do that. You're all trapped in here with us. Sen, what's going on with you? Tell us about yourself.
I actually just got back from an open mat. So my name is Sen Feng Lim. You can call me Sen. I use he, him pronouns. And I am a first-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I've wrestled for 40 years. So I grew up on the mats pretty much. My kids are black belts in karate, and so I've always been attached to martial arts. Oddly, no Chinese martial arts, which is very weird. Just the Brazilian and Japanese ones. I don't know how that happened, but it did. My parents didn't want me to do anything except violin and piano, so you know how it goes.
That was Asian enough, I guess.
Right? Too much Asianness, and it'd be so Asian, it'd be bad. But I'm a game designer, writer, and a consultant as well. So I do all the things that James does, just for different people. No, for different people, and because we know different publishers, really, that's what it is. So I'm more on the board game side. James is more on the RPG side. But together, when we bump our fists and say Wonder Twin Powers activate, a whole lot of good stuff happens.
Yeah.
That's right.
And you should answer the icebreaker question I forgot to ask myself, which is, what is a fight scene you really like from fiction?
The restaurant scene in 2006 Dragon Tiger Gate, which is based off the manhwa series Oriental Heroes, which I grew up with and just absolutely adore. So seeing it live with Donnie Yen doing the fight choreography was chef's kiss.
Awesome. A favorite scene of mine is the first fight between Batman and Shredder in the cartoon adaptation of Batman versus Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And if that sounds like a ridiculous thing to have my favorite fight scene in, you too will have the reaction that I had when I watched it. Fonda, tell us about yourself.
I'm Fonda Lee. Hi, everyone. This is my very first Big Bad Con. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you to the gentleman on the screen for inviting me. I'm the odd bird here. I am a science fiction and fantasy novelist. I have a bunch of books out. I'm probably best well known for the Greenbone Saga, which is right there. And Des is holding it up. It starts with Jade City, continues with Jade War, and concludes with Jade Legacy, has a spin-off novella, short stories. I'm also the author of a few science fiction novels and Nebula nominated novella called Untethered Sky, which is my most recent work. I'm co-writing a project with Shannon Lee, Bruce Lee's daughter, and I have another science fiction space opera that's in the works. So a bunch of books. All of them feature punching, fighting of some sort. Also have a lifelong love of martial arts. Started training in karate when I was a teenager. Also a black belt, so I have black belts in karate and kung fu, which I also trained in for many years. And yeah, just excited to talk about one of my favorite subjects.
That's what's up.
Favorite
fight scene.
Okay, there are a lot, and you sprung this on me, so I feel like I a ranked order. But top of mind, I'm going to go with the stairwell fight in Atomic Blonde.
That's a good one.
Haven't seen that.
Oh, really? It's good. Oh, something to go watch. Have you seen Dragon Tiger Gate though?
I haven't.
Go watch it.
Yeah. All right. So I'm a launch into some of the questions that we had prepared for ourselves ahead of time. We also will be taking questions over in the chat. The one thing that I request two things from the questions. First of all, your question does need to be in the form of a question. Thankfully, this is easier in text than in like live panels where someone got a microphone, acts a fool. That's the first thing. Second thing, try not to ask us like, what are your favorite media, which do like your favorite media with fighting in them, or like if you ask us questions about like media recommendations, try to be like really specific, or we're going to go on forever because panelists always do that when you ask them for their favorite media. So yeah, just those two things. Let's get into it. So we're going to start with a pretty general one. So how does martial arts provide structure and meaning to readers or players, allowing them to connect to a book or a game? Fonda, let's begin with you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's so great about martial arts, and especially fight scenes in particular, is that they are tentpole events, right, in a narrative. So if you think of a novel, which is what I'm most familiar with, when you're thinking about sort of the ebb and flow of tension in a novel, violence, and in particular, a physical violence is creates this very intuitive structure where you have building tension, and then that building tension has to be resolved in some way, and then you have kind of the consequences of that, and then you go through that cycle again, right? You build tension and then you release it. So that creates this this rhythm, this sense of pacing for a story. And then when you extrapolate that to something like a longer form thing, episodic television series, or like a multi-session game campaign, you have events around which you can build your story because you've grounded them in conflict. And so the sort of almost thinking about planning for, as a writer, as a creator, thinking about planning for those moments where violence is going to erupt, or you're going to create the tension to set up that violence to erupt, is a great way to give structure to that story. So it's not just constantly like, all right, it's characters walking around in the forest or having conversations, right? It all has to go somewhere, and going somewhere often does mean a violent confrontation.
That's great. Yeah, Sen, tell us how you approach this.
So
how does combat provide structure?
Well, I mean, without combat, there's no, tournament arc, so I can't do anything without tournament arcs. No, I'm not kidding in some ways, and I am kidding in other ways. So I use martial arts and physical combat a lot in games because they are, for certain types of players, it is the concept of telling a story through just physical violence and the training to get better at doing that physical violence usually engages certain types of players very well. And it's such a trope in media to have a fight, lose, train, get better, go back and fight, beat that person, go on. And I'm not lying when I say it's a tournament arc in a lot of ways, because it really does help me structure games when I'm making like tech trees or skill trees or point buy systems for anything, that you have to start at a low level, and failure in things like the martial arts, just even in real life martial arts, failing to do something. We have a saying in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, it's you either win or you learn. That's it. You don't lose by participating in martial arts. And I feel the same way in a lot of games and game systems, that playing the game is the goal. And if I can entice you by having this very visceral connection with physicality and movement and combat and technique, and trying to be doing the flashy moves, or are you a really effective fighter who does this type of move set? There's that grounding, I think, that Fonda was talking about, to reality. But then there's also, I think, stylistic expression through choice that games allow us to do. Like, what kind of fighter do you want to be? Do you want to be that flashy one? Do you want to be the rugged one? Do you want to be the tank? Do you want to be whatever? And a lot of times you get those tropes about like nationalities and styles of fighters and fighting styles suiting certain types of people. So I usually use it to try to do that kind of stuff, but then hopefully turn it on its ear a little bit every now and then, subvert those tropes, right? James, what about you?
Yes. So my fascination with combat is centered on the relationship between combat and culture. And
Hmm.
to a certain extent, I feel great joy when I'm fighting or when I'm practicing. But the thing that keeps me coming back to martial arts, and the thing that keeps me expressing martial arts in games or through characters or through stories, is the opportunity to say something about culture, to say something about religion, and to help other people learn something about a certain perspective or a certain identity or a certain history, the same way that I did learning about Japanese culture through martial arts, learning about Brazilian culture through martial arts, learning about American culture through martial arts. So yeah, that's my favorite form of structure, is bringing culture and identity and religion and nationality in through martial culture. Um, so yeah, let's drill a little bit further in on something that I think we all talked about, which is martial arts as a vehicle for character development. So, how can fight scenes in martial arts function as expressions of character and opportunities for a character's development? Sen, why don't you start this time?
So I really do think there is that. So when I grew up, my cousins would tape stuff, and when they were in Malaysia, and they'd come back to Canada, and they'd bring stuff back from Malaysia, and we'd watch like Snake Fist and Eagle Shadow or something like that. And there's always like these training montages, right? And so I think a lot of the tropey kind of character building that you get in a game system, anyways. And because I mainly make board games, and I have less time than we have, say, in a role playing game, and a lot less time than we have maybe in a novel or a novel series that spans many years, like Fondas do. We get the kind of understanding that we're trying to develop a character to do a thing, which in most games is win that game, right? So we're looking at that style of development there, which is not necessarily linear, because it depends on things like what's the win con in the game, what is the dice system in the game, what are the card systems in the game, and using martial arts to develop things that way. So, for example, a lot of martial arts have to do with, say, range and managing the range between you and your opponent. And then how do you engage them? And what are those rules of engagement? And making a system within that parameter of range and distance management to then develop a character through a path of like a deck buy system or something allows people to actually tell a story about how their character developed over the course of a 1 hour game. In a deck building system where you are buying cards into a deck and building your deck as you go along, people are often, they're not saying it out loud, but when you look in the deck later from the start to the finish, you look at what they got rid of, you look at what they put into their deck, and their final deck really does tell a story of how that character developed from this novice to like an adept to a master of that martial arts. And so that's kind of how I see a lot of the game systems that I'm working on is evolution and growth of character through um, mechanical advantages that you are buying. Um, and a game, because in a shorter game, people are most focused on the win, you don't necessarily get kind of the depth of storytelling that you're going to get in other forms of media, but you can interpolate all that. And I think that's the fascinating part is people tell stories about their characters that are beyond what they actually created in their deck or whatever. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. That range thing, I want to come back to that at some point. But yeah, Fonda, tell us how you use combat as a vehicle for character development.
Yeah, I think they're really intertwined, both the character and their journey and the extent to which violence figures into that journey. And one of the things that I've often spoken about in writing classes is how action doesn't come at the expense of character development. Action should be character development. You should come out of a scene of violence or a high conflict situation having a better understanding of that character. There's this saying among writers, show don't tell, right? Which is a horrible saying. I always think that it's often misused, don't always agree with it. But I think the principle of it, is that we want to see demonstration of what the author is trying to tell us about these characters, right? So I can tell you that this character is brave or they're smart or they're resourceful, but as a reader or as an audience member, you won't believe that until you see it actually happen. So violence, conflict is the ultimate crucible in which character is revealed. And I think that is so important to keep in mind because how a character reacts in their extreme stress, right, is kind of their most core self. And if you can put your characters in that extreme stress, you're also going to create a stronger connection between the character and the reader, the audience member, the player, because you are putting them in a position of extreme vulnerability. Right? What makes us invested in characters is often the fact that they are vulnerable and we're worried for them. So there's no kind of better situation to put them in than life or death, or a situation where they might actually get hurt, physically or emotionally, psychologically, and you also have to then deal with the repercussions of violence, right? And I think that's where a lot of the character development happens. Isn't just this thing happened, but what are the lingering effects? What are all the consequences that trickle into the rest of the narrative and into that character in the future? So how do you take, every single fight scene that happens has to have some impact on that person, on that character, that you can build for all the future events that they're going to go through.
It's fascinating hearing you talk after reading all your books. It's just like, oh, I get it now. I see what you're doing. You're like pulling the wool from my eyes, lifting the scales.
I was just thinking about how, like, in your setting, the primary martial culture that you focus on is full of people who do this very literally. So you're doing this as an author, but then also you're depicting a martial culture in which people fight a lot, but they talk shit way more than they fight. And they're in that situation where these things get built up and then a fight happens and all of the shit talking that they've been doing for like half a book comes to a head in so what are you actually going to do to this person who's trying to hit you? It's cool.
It's fun.
Yeah. And yeah, Sen, I was when you said the range thing, thinking about that, like in terms of character development, I'm not like in real life. I mostly don't think of myself as a striker. I think of myself as a grappler mostly. And we had been in class studying these like little like short range punches that have this very like structured stance that we were using. And they always didn't seem to do much. They don't hit very hard. They're low risk, low reward. And then I fought Sen, who's a better grappler than me. And there I was just like so terrified of you getting in and getting Kazushi on me, and I started throwing these like shitty little punches just
They
to like
sucked.
keep you
I'll
slightly.
tell you right now, they sucked.
Yeah. And they didn't like harm you, but they like kept you like just far enough away to get like to like keep you from getting like the Kazushi I was terrified about.
Yeah, so everybody out there who
yeah.
who doesn't know James and I personally, James is like 5 inches taller than me also. So he's keeping me at bay. Just like, you know, like
achievement unlocked, taller than one person.
Yeah, when you like put your hand on the forehead of your baby brother, that was James and me. Except I think I'm older than James, so it was pretty funny anyways. But yeah, I think there's a lot to say about, you know, fighting styles and, you know, are you close up? Are you far away? Are you that mid range? Are you, you know, coming in, coming out? And personality is expressed in fighting, right? So, and I think that's a really interesting thing, that especially when you read a book like Fonda's series, where you learn about how you know, Kalhilo fights and how his sister fights, and they fight differently because they're different people, even though they went to the same school and ostensibly probably know the same martial art, but they have different strengths and limitations, and their personalities show in how they fight too. And I think that is storytelling is a wonderful thing to be able to embody that, right? Embody personality within the fighting style.
And I think we see that, right, in real life, right? I mean, we all have trained in martial arts where you know people that have their just vastly different styles, like within the same martial art. And I think a lot of iconic martial arts actors and actresses, for example, they are so memorable because you associate them with their fighting style, right? Like Bruce Lee is a completely different fighting style than Donnie Yen, than Jackie Chan, right? So you have you're absolutely right, Sam. There's like a personality that comes through just in physicality, but also it's also just the cool vehicle to give your character some interesting and memorable characteristics, right? People are always kind of defaulting to things like, I don't know, facial scars or tattoos or something like that, but like something about their fighting style or about their preferred weapon or, you know, their some particular way they train, like those sorts of things give flavor to characters as well.
Right. So Fonda, in your series, there are 2 major weapons, for the martial artists. There's the sword, and then there's the knife, right? And we know, you know, that if a character prefers the knife, they're a different breed of character than the characters that prefer the sword, and that is really cool. You'll pick up on that when you read the books. It's you should all read the books. Is all I'm saying.
They're really good.
Thank you, Sam.
So
Thanks, now my publicist, you're hired.
So in our different media, I'm curious. So how do you decide how and when a fight starts and ends? What is when you're writing or when you're running a game or designing a game? What makes you feel as a creative, not just in the narrative, that like this is the time when a fight should start, and also what makes you feel like, okay, someone's won and we're done, and this is the point at which like a head gets chopped off or someone yields, or like, so creatively, how do you decide like when a fight starts and ends? And Fonda, let's start with you.
Yeah, there's really 2 types of fights. There's expected violence, and then there's unexpected violence, right? And the way that you bring them to life in the narrative is going to kind of reflect. So, for example, expected violence would be a duel, right? Where 2 people have exchanged their intentions to fight, and they meet at a certain time, and you know this is happening, and crowd gathers, and they pick their weapons, right? And so there is a whole sequence that is the reader knows this is going to happen. There's a level of tension that builds there. And then there's the unexpected violence, which is like the ambush in the alleyway that you don't see coming, right? Or the assassination attempt. And those are the ones that you want to you want it to be as startling to the audience as it is to the character, the victim in that situation. But it also has to be entirely believable. And so in both cases, what I try to accomplish when I start a scene like that is this sense of both surprise and inevitability. So you should feel like you, on one hand, you're caught off guard, but you also have that feeling of like, I knew, like I should have seen it coming. I knew that was, of course, like all the signs were there. Everything was building to that. And that's a tricky thing. Like as a creative, I think it's very much an exercise in intuition. And you oftentimes, I think, try it and then maybe you're tweaking it, or like you get feedback and you're not quite, like you kind of have to figure out the right time and place where it feels like you're right on that line, right? Where you haven't kind of dragged out the tension for so long that people are like impatient and like, my God, when are they going to fight already? Come on. Versus like, wow, that came out of nowhere. And like, I don't understand why they're fighting now. And, I mean, we've seen media like that too, right? Like,
well,
it's like,
we're going to
why
start
are they
fighting
fighting?
when I'm done powering up to level 9,000. That's when we're going to start fighting.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, it's an intuitive thing. And then the second part of your question, Mendez, the how do you know when you're done, I think is also very much tied to that, right? Is it the sort of violence where it's like a stab in the back in the dark and it's like over like that, right? Or is it a situation where like the two people are evenly matched and they're just like huffing and puffing and like beating the shit out of each other, and like they're keeping going even though they're like both on their last legs, and maybe that's the emotional note of that scene. So it really is one of those situations where the demands of the narrative are going to guide you and tell you when have you accomplished the goal of this scene, because every fight scene should have a narrative goal, and whether that's like this character has to prove themselves, or this character has to confront a threat, or they have to survive an ambush, whatever it is, that is the narrative goal has to be fulfilled, and it has to come to kind of a place where you can take the result and then draw the consequences.
Yeah, I would say that like when you have an audience, like an objective audience that is sitting there watching something or reading something, it's very different than a game when you are the fighter. That there's an intent that the author has to tell a story through violence. And if at the end of the fight, let's say the person who won is still like beating down on this person and just like walks away and comes back and kicks them again, like you're telling something to the audience about the personality of that fighter, not necessarily how good of a fighter they are, but something else about them, about maybe it's revenge, maybe they're just a total dickhole, I don't know. But it's that kind of thing. Whereas in most of the stuff I'm working on, it's did you win, because that counts for points in some kind of system where you're going to gain more points to do more fighting later. That so it is very different. And a lot of that
But
kind of
I think
stuff is
both of
that
the
you live in
things
your
that
head. Say that again, James. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Sorry to interrupt, but I think that in different ways, both of you are talking about like structural objectives.
Yeah.
Whether that structural objective comes from like narrative or from like victory points. Just like imagine ProZD saying that victory.
Yeah.
Point. But
I gotta
there's
tap my cheese chakra. Hold on.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a meta level on which you're thinking about like I don't know, like victory points in novel plotting, or you're thinking about like scene objectives in board games. Like it seems like there's a crossover there.
Yeah, it depends on how narrative the board game is, or how much narrative
Mhm.
the producers of the board game provide, or how much
Yeah.
we expect them to like live in their head and see it in their head. So yeah, it is interesting to think about it from the perspective of, oh, I'm an audience or I'm an active player in the game, right? So
I think one thing I was saying earlier about like expected violence versus unexpected violence still translates really well to games, because there's the situations in games where, like, as a player you have an objective, right? Like, you want to like get to this situation and have this combat, right? And that's kind of like expected violence, right? So there's the tension that's building internally as the player or players are like getting to that point. But then I think there's the elements of games where you are like throwing stuff at play, or things are happening to the player, right? And they are having to react. And I think there's a good parallel there, right? In terms of like the tension, right? Like, as a player, when you are being confronted with like stuff where you have to react, and like, you're the unexpected violence, right? You're in that same situation where it's the surprise, it's surprising but inevitable. And I think creating that balance for the player as well, when you're like finding the right time to like hit them with the things that they have to react to, it's very much what authors have to do.
There's a moment, I'm thinking of like various unexpected fight scenes, which I'm not going to describe, from like the Greenbone Saga or from like games I've played, where like I felt like surprised and betrayed and shocked almost. And then like it slowly crept up on me as I was like processing what happened, the ways in which this had to happen, or the ways in which things that I hadn't really paid attention to, because I don't have good reading comprehension, like led up to this moment having to happen. And that confluence of like expected and unexpected feels really special when you can make it happen.
I mean, I mentioned Wandering Monsters as a joke, but it's also true, right? That if everything is so scripted that you know when it's going to come, violence doesn't hold that threat anymore, right? So there's a good balance between it. And so most board game systems are a little excuse me, are a little bit less hidden, because there's no game master and there's no author that's leading you through something as much. There are definitely some board games that are a little more like RPGs, but RPGs kind of have the best of both worlds, in that the GM can decide that it's violence time, roll for initiative, right? Or there's Wandering Monsters, or all that kind of stuff. So surprise can happen, and violence can be more surprising in a lot of those type of games. I remember playing Mansions of Madness. You ever played those games? Like Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu stuff, but the board game versions. And it's kind of disappointing sometimes in the older versions. It has a card, and you flip over the card, and it's like, this is what's you're doing, and if you beat it, this happens. If you don't, this happens. Like, I don't want to know those results. I want to be surprised by the result of the violence, right? I don't want to know until if I win or lose, then I should figure out from there. So it's sometimes the medium is going to betray, I think, some of that intentional storytelling. Video games are really good as well, because they have, you can guide people through certain plot points a little bit better.
I think that thing that you mentioned intersects with like both a thing that we talked about in the email ahead of time and a question we just got in chat about someone asked a question about combat pacing,
right? Which
I think intersects with a thing that you're talking about like how much detail to go into. And this is like an eternal problem in like RPG design, right? Like whether you're going to get into like the actual cut and thrust of like the motions that someone's doing in combat, or you're going to focus on it from that like objective, like narrative based point. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about how we decide how much detail to go into in a fight. So again, Fonda, tell us about how you decide like how much, like which individual details to bring in, especially knowing that you're an experienced martial artist writing for an audience of people who may have never thrown a punch.
Sure. I think that the advantage that I have, right, as an author is that on one hand, I have all the time in the world to talk about, like, I mean, unless my editor says, you know, you're this is it, you're exceeded your word count. I have as much time as I want to talk about anything. But on the other hand, I don't have to, right? I can take it down to like the absolute bare minimum. So unlike, let's say, film, right, where to have a fight scene, you have to literally choreograph every single move, and every move has to be in there, right? In prose, I don't have to do that. So I have to be selective about what exactly I want to put on the page, and that really comes down to a combination of clarity and emotional stakes and style, right? So I need to kind of convey those things about a fight, and I will kind of write out the whole thing oftentimes, and then go through and smooth it out and cut this and add that and like massage it a lot. Like some of those fight scenes, when you get down to them, when the reader is reading them, I want it to read very fast. I want it to feel like it's happening very quickly, and that it is actually like this blur of violence that's happening. But in order to be able to get the reader to read quickly, I have to like do a lot of finessing with actual prose to get it to read that fast. And I don't have to write out every single move. In fact, if I did, that would be like incredibly boring and dry and read like a manual, right? So there's no reason for me to go into a blow by blow of like a fight scene. But I need to convey enough that the reader is able to fill in all the gaps. So I have to make sure that there's enough clarity of like what's happening, who's attacking and what they're doing and who's defending and what's hitting, like what's injuries are happening and what's the environment. Like I have to have enough going on that the reader can like imagine it, and then readers are incredible because they'll just sort of fill in all the gaps for you. So it's one of those things where I always want to make sure there's enough detail, but not too much, and not ever to the point where the detail is getting in the way of the fluidity of the scene.
Yeah. When I'm running role-playing games, and sometimes I can code this into my design, sometimes I don't have the opportunity, but when I'm GMing, sometimes I change the scope and the level of detail in a scene as a reaction to something that a player did. So if a player is approaching a certain fight in let's say it's like a superhero game, and you've got like a superhero who's fighting like a whole bunch of like low level villains all at once, and we're at like a sort of like a tactical scale of combat where large numbers of people are like fighting or dying or falling as casualties in a moment. If a player like does something dramatic, either a dramatic success or a dramatic failure, sometimes I change the scope at that point from like tactical to like strategic. We see how we suddenly go from you really succeeded, so we're seeing how the little thing that you're doing is affecting like the whole city and like the supervillain's plans. Or maybe if someone like catastrophically fails, it's like you thought you were going to defeat this guy who just seemed like a cursory like trivial enemy, but suddenly they do something that activates one of your weaknesses, and now you're embroiled in a fight with just one person. So the scope and the level of focus changes as a response to like a thing that a player did.
That's really, I think that's really cool and has a lot of parallels to fiction, because you don't need every fight scene to be the same level of detail or length, right? It all depends on what role they play, because there's going to be, I remember I wrote this one book, my debut novel was about a futuristic MMA fighter, essentially. And so there's a whole bunch of fight scenes, right? But I don't need to go through every single one. I had to kind of pick like, okay, which are the ones that actually deserve a whole chapter? And then which are the ones which like, this is summary, right? Like this fight happened.
Right.
And so much of it, I think, depends on making sure each fight feels fresh and different. Because if fights feel repetitive, like that's like the kiss of death for like action scenes, right? Is like when they get boring or they get predictable and they get repetitive. So you have to like avoid that at all costs. So if you're getting to that point where it's like, oh, this feels like it's not adding anything new, then that's like a summary fight.
That's funny you say that, because a lot of my friends absolutely love The Raid. And I think The Raid's an okay movie, but that's like the martial arts of my people, Malaysians and Indonesians. And so it's like, it's just the same thing over and over again. It's Pencat Salat 90 bazillion times. So I've seen that my entire life. I know. And everybody's like, you don't like The Raid? It's like, aren't you a martial artist? Like, yeah, but it's kind of all the same.
Sure, but I am The Raid, so actually, Sen, I wanted to.
The Raid I love, but I mean, I did feel I had a sort of similar feeling with. I do love John Wick, but by the time we got to like the end of that franchise, I was like, okay, this is starting to feel like
too much of a good thing.
I've kind of it's like been saturated, right? Like you reach saturation point. And I mean,
how did you win? Oh, it was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and guns. Who knew?
Who knew?
Sen, I wanted to twist this question a little bit for you, which is, so you have a lot of experience as a martial arts instructor. So when you're teaching someone to wrestle, how do you know how much detail? We had a question in the chat about like the role of the teacher. So I want to bring that in. How do you know, like you've got a student, they're doing something wrong. They're doing 12 things wrong at once. How do you know like what kind of detail and how much detail to go into when you're teaching someone a technique?
I break it down to, well, first of all, I ask them what their job is. And I do this a lot, and I figure out how to relate the body movements that they have to do to what they do in their everyday life or their job, right? Which is weird, I know. But it actually works really well.
That's cool.
And a lot of it is just teaching them the basics and telling them to just, if you can remember 3 things today, that's all I want you to do. Because I'm going to show you, you're drinking from the fire hose, literally the first day you come, and it's just repeat, repeat, repeat. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try. The body moves in only certain ways. If it feels awkward, don't do it. You're probably doing it wrong if it feels awkward. So just repeat it until it feels okay, right? And we'll come around and correct. There's lots of times getting your numbers in, repetition is good, but also play is good. Like just being playful and working against a resisting opponent, working against an opponent who knows kind of what they're doing, but won't get hurt if you do something a little bit off book, because that happens a lot with new people. So yeah, I think the role of the teacher is tapping into what the person already finds comfortable and making the uncomfortable comfortable, and just telling them it's okay to fail, because by failing, you're going to learn what not to do. And by doing it correctly and getting the result out of it, which is really apparent in grappling arts, because you will have thrown the person, or you will have locked them, or you will have submitted them, which is very different than striking arts, I find anyways. The result, the feedback loop is really pretty quick. And so people are pretty good with it, I think. And everybody has probably play wrestled as a kid. They just forgot because they grew old, right? And so getting back to that playful nature,
and it was role-playing games.
Yeah, a lot of it. Well, that's the thing. I talk about that in class all the time. Not in martial arts class, in psychology class. I talk about that. Like, hey, does anybody play RPGs? Well, then you still do imaginative play, right? If you build Gunpla, then you still do constructive play, right? So we're still playing as adults, which is remarkable. We have about 5 minutes left. Is there anything else, like questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing about
Yeah.
that question
Yeah.
that came through in chat about the role of teacher in games and fiction,
Yeah.
martial arts. I think one of the wonderful things about that role, like it's so sort of iconic role, right? You see it in so many martial arts narratives, is like the role of the teacher, right? And I think it's because that particular role, that character, is often like the forcible engine of growth for the protagonist, right? There's nothing like having the teacher, and we know this is martial arts students, there's nothing like having a teacher there like threatening you with the staff
Yeah.
to like force growth. So there's that, right? But I think one of the things that I would encourage, right, is to have is to kind of go beyond the stereotype, right, of that like the wise master. Because like I've had multiple instructors throughout my martial arts life. I'm sure you guys have as well, right? They're just human beings, right? So I like the idea of having like the teacher, the mentor, who also has flaws, right? They've got maybe their blind spots, or they have the martial artist has to kind of learn from multiple teachers, right, in order to kind of cobble together their own journey. And I think that there's a lot of directions that you can take that character that kind of go beyond just sort of the very sort of stock martial arts master character.
Yeah, and those kinds of variations are like, from a cultural consulting perspective, great way to avoid Orientalism.
Yeah,
really really effective. So yeah, we are about at time, and some of us will be in Discord afterwards to answer more questions, but like, let's finish it out. Like, remind us who you are, like where you are on the internet, and like something cool you're working on. Fonda, why don't you start?
Once again, I'm Fonda Lee. I'm a science fiction fantasy novelist. You can find me online. My website is fondalee.com. I'm on Instagram at fonda.lee. And I'm currently working on more books.
all the books.
More books.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sen.
I'm Sen-Fung Lim. I'm a game designer, writer, and consultant. Currently working on this thing, which is
what is that thing, Sen?
it's a juncture. So this is a hopping vampire, and Banana Chen and I are working on the next installment of stuff for that role-playing system, and we're working on a whole bunch of stuff. I have a Kickstarter coming out for Core of Discovery, which is based on the graphic novels Manifest Destiny. So that'll be kickstarting in the end of April. So if you like board games about Lewis and Clark and monsters, then there you go. So you can follow me on Blue Sky and Twitter, whatever we're calling that these days. And I'm the only person with this name, I think, in the world. So I'm easy to find.
Nice. And I'm very excited about that Juncture expansion because I'm on it.
Yeah.
So excited. I'm James Mendes Hodes. My website is jamesmendeshodes.com. I'm on Twitter, but Twitter's dead, so I don't really do anything there. Please interact with me on Blue Sky instead. I'm lula.vampiro. Oh, stuff I'm working on. I'm working on a game with Fonda and Sen at the same time, which might relate to themes from this panel. Yeah,
it might relate.
And things that we've talked about a lot. So I'm excited for y'all to play that when it gets announced.
I'm excited to play it. I haven't played it yet.
Whatever it is. I will run it for you. We will make that happen. But yeah, it is midnight my time. It is 9 Pacific time. Thank you all so much for coming. We'll see you in Discord, and it's good seeing you all. Yeah. Yeah.